What's up everyone, Thralls Metal here once again. I'm Necrotic Nick and I have another collection update for you. So I went back to Rotted Life Records to pick up some more stuff that I have my eye on, and I also hit up Nuclear Winter Records, which has a really good distro as well. There's going to be links to both in case you guys are curious. I strongly recommend them. They had a lot of stuff that was fiercely underground and some stuff that was kind of hard to get because they were on labels across the pond, and save on shipping that way. This is definitely pretty death metal centric. There is some Blackened death metal, there's some death doom, there is some death thrash in here, but it all pretty much circulates around death. I kind of had a bit of a theme when I went shopping. So let's just get into this thing because this is a pretty cool stack. Brzask, at least I think that's how you pronounce that. This is their debut demo, came out originally last year but was re-released on Black Market Metal label this year. Now this came in my Metalhead box and I said that was a ski resort. I don't know. I'm still not sure. It kind of looks a little like an airport now. I don't know. Either way, this is Polish Blackened death metal with a Sudeten theme in terms of like Sudeten folklore and whatnot, which is a pretty cool theme. This is a pretty well produced demo. First off, the sound quality is really good on here. It doesn't sound very muddy at all. It actually sounds mixed really well. And this is really interesting in terms of what I compared it to, because like listening to it, I definitely got a lot of the black metal atmosphere in here, and the death metal side really comes out in the vocals. The vocals are very much like death metal roars and they're really solid, but there's a lot of melodies on here that kind of scream Mastodon a little bit. I don't know, it's kind of interesting. So somewhere between Mastodon and Belphegor, you kind of have this band. At the same time, I got a lot of like 90s death metal in there sort of mixed in, and there's some keys on here that add to the atmosphere, but they kind of come across as a little bit cheesy. And honestly, that was probably the thing that kind of sounded the most demo-like, because they didn't sound particularly polished. They kind of just sound like someone had a keyboard and they just wanted to pepper in a little bit of like gothic atmosphere in there to kind of spice it up a bit. But other than that, I really didn't have a problem with this. This is 3 tracks. I think it's about almost 20 minutes and a pretty solid listen. So yeah, the Metalhead box came through with a cool underground selection here. So yeah, definitely check this out. Steel Bearing Hand, Slay in Hell. This is the second album from these Texas death thrashers. This actually features Chris Bonner of Frozen Soul on bass, not guitars in this. He plays guitars in Frozen Soul. And this whoops unbelievable amounts of ass. Like right away, this thing just opens up in a flurry of just great thrashy riffs. And it's interesting that the guitars are fiercely thrashy. Like they have that kind of thrash sizzle, like that big chunky sound that you would associate with like tons of heavier thrash acts. But it's really cool how they pepper in moments of death metal and even death doom on here. I was really shocked at all the different elements they brought on here. Tomb Spawn, my god, that song is ridiculously heavy. But this album is just nuts in terms of just being high energy almost all the time, and the songwriting is just incredible. The last track is like 13 minutes and it is absolutely brutal. Like somehow in this death thrash mix, they properly channeled incantation and brought in some unbelievably heavy death doom breaks. The only thing that keeps it from going full bore death doom is the fact that they keep that thrashy guitar tone so it doesn't quite have that fierce low end that you hear in incantation or most death doom. But my god, these songs absolutely rip. And I mean, I was already in love with Frozen Soul, and now I'm gonna have to get more by this band because this just flat out whoops ass. This is an absolutely incredible album. Came out on Carbonized Records, just in case I didn't bring that up. Oh my god, go out and get this. This is just pure fun to listen to. If you're a thrash fan, you'll love it. If you're a death metal fan, you'll love it. I think if you love metal in general, there's so many goddamn riffs on here, you'll probably love it. Definitely check this out. Inoculation, Celestial Protrinity. This is the second release from this Cleveland-based technical death metal band on Maggot Stomp Records. Good thing I went back to that site because I knew they had to have something cool, because it seems like that's all they sell. I already had their first full length and the EP, and I was already a huge fan of this band just in terms of their wild sci-fi themes and kind of early tech death sound. Like it kind of leans more on like later death and gore guts, maybe a little bit of suffocation in there too in terms of the brute force, but definitely a lot of Nocturnus. That is one of the main things I picked up on here. The intro though is fiercely Nocturnus because it sounds like Space Mountain from Disney World, except in hell. This is riff a minute, just insane technical playing, but loads of brutality. I would say it's kind of comparable to a band like Undeath, except on the more technical side. It's riff a minute, kind of like what they do, but it's not the like more groove-oriented old school death metal. This is definitely more along the lines of tech death. Pretty well produced. It's a 3-piece, and all the instruments stand out really well. The drum work on here is absolutely fantastic. I will say the songs could be a bit longer. I think the longest song on here is maybe about 4.5 minutes. And sometimes it's really hard to make out the track breaks. Like there were, you know, moments here where I was just kind of like jamming along and I was like, yeah, man, this track's pretty badass. And I was like, oh no, I'm halfway through the second track. Where did that track break? Really cool alternating vocals, so you got really good highs and lows on here. The guitar work is exceptional. There's even some really cool bass lines on here that are very distinct. Solid release from these guys. Definitely still old school, but definitely has a lot of modern touches and well produced riffs, blast beats, all the things you love about death metal. Definitely check this out. Disrupted, Pure Death. This is the second album from this Swedish death metal band, and this is Swedish as fuck. This is pure HM2 glory, and I think this is done right in terms of just the production here. This sounds a lot like the early 90s stuff, like Dismembered and Entombed, and then, you know, a bit of Bloodbath in there too. Now, what I really like about this is the fact that they even pepper in a few death and roll moments. The song Human Stew actually has some riffs on there that scream, you know, more Wolverine Blues than Left Hand Path, and really cool atmosphere. Love the vocals on here. It's a good solid growl, but it's really clear. Again, kind of that Bloodbath vibe. The HM2 tone is on point. This is nice and dirty sounding. There's that kind of extra grittiness to it. And while, you know, there's a ton of HM2 bands out there, it's practically its own subset of death metal. So you can make a lot of arguments that this is very derivative. And it is. I don't care. I still love this sound. And when it's done right, when it kind of captures that old school feel, that's when I love it even more. And that is this. This absolutely whoops ass. I am not tired of this when it's done right, and man, this is done perfectly. I need to get their first album, because if it's anything like this, I'll probably love it and tell you how much I love the HM2 tone once again. I also have to bring up the fact that there's songs in here that seem oddly Darkthrone-ish. Total Death and Goat Lord, they're not covers, they're just the song titles. I don't know, a little bit of Darkthrone worship, or they're just fans. I don't know, just something I noticed. Either way, I strongly recommend this. If you love Bloodbath, Dismember, Entombed, all that stuff, just get it. It's good. It's Swedish death metal. If you love that shit, you will love this. Check it out. Execration, Syndicate of Lethargy. This is the debut album from this Norwegian death metal act. Now, I own one of their later albums, Morbid Dimensions, and I saw this and was like, well, I haven't checked out on the earlier stuff, so I decided to pick it up since it was, you know, pretty well priced. And this is a little bit different. Morbid Dimensions is definitely more on the atmospheric side. I would even say maybe a little bit more like Blackened death metal. This is straight up death metal and very technical, very dissonant, very ugly. I would say in terms of like a comparison, Hate Eternal or Steve Tucker era Morbid Angel would definitely be pretty close. A lot of the same kind of riffing, you know, the big murky guitars. The bass is kind of oddly fuzzy on here, like it's kind of like a warm fuzzy versus that big heavy chunky death metal sound. I gotta say, this is a very chaotic listen. It's all over the place. You get abrupt time signature shifts and just wild technical parts. And I had some issues with the vocals on here. They're kind of all over the place, and sometimes their place in the mix kind of varies. Like sometimes they're way out front, sometimes they're way in the back, and they kind of change really quick. That kind of bugged me a little bit just in terms of like a cohesive listen. And there are some atmospheric elements, though I think they kind of overdo them a bit. You have Swarming Locusts on the song Swarming Locusts, like it sounds like a recording of that, plus a lot of feedback and static behind it just to make this grating, dissonant listen that seems like it's getting louder and louder. And I know that's probably kind of effective with the atmosphere of the song, but it kind of got annoying. And then Clinging to Existence just kind of drones out at the end, and it's a really long ending. And I want to say there was even 20 seconds of silence after that before the album actually ended. So yeah, this is kind of like maybe a rough start because I really like Morbid Dimensions, and apparently their last album, I think that came out in 2017, was really good too. But this was still pretty solid, and I still strongly recommend checking it out. This is, again, fiercely technical, distant, ugly death metal, and if any of that's your thing, definitely check it out. Guillatine Beheaded EP. This is the second EP from this Long Beach death metal act. Now there are a lot of bands with guillotine in the title, so this one I have to specify is spelled with an A instead of an O in it. There is a thrash metal band called Guillotine, which I was kind of confused by, but this is a completely different band. This is very old school death metal, I would say kind of caveman death metal. Riffs are just chunky as hell. They scream 90s death metal, like Cannibal Corpse, Autopsy, Death, all that stuff, and actually really well done. Vocals are kind of just an indistinct grunt, but I mean that is kind of the caveman thing. It's just like just chest beating, just kind of muffled grunts, and it's kind of all in one range though, which is kind of the thing. Like you don't get a lot of high shrieks in there to sort of break it up, but it's effective. Again, this is caveman death metal. This is chest beating stuff, and it's supposed to be riff driven and just, you know, groove laden, and that's what it is. If I was going to compare this to someone more modern, I would say Outer Heaven is pretty damn close. They could use just like a touch of reverb on the vocals because they are a little dry. If you're going to go for the caveman thing, make it sound like he's actually in a cave. This kind of just sounds like he's right up against the mic, and it's kind of super compressed. Now this does come with some rehearsals on here, which I thought was really cool. The last 4 tracks in here are all a live rehearsal, and these guys kick ass live. The vocals are definitely more muffled on this, but I like the overall feel of it, and they just hammer right through these songs, which are different than the ones in the EP. They don't simply just do live versions of the songs that are in the EP. Definitely made me miss going to live shows, that's for sure, because they definitely brought a fun energy to it, and I really dug this. So yeah, definitely check this out. Caveman, chest beating, death metal, if you love that sort of thing, here you go. Nocturnal Hollow, a whisper of an horrendous soul. Sorry, it doesn't say a horrendous soul, it says an horrendous soul, which I can't do that. That doesn't sound right. It's not right. Anyway, this is the 5th album from this Venezuelan 2-man death metal act. I actually have 2 of their other releases, and you would swear this came out in Stockholm in the 1990s, because this is, once again, some Swedish death metal sounding shit. I would say Dismember almost specifically. The vocals even remind me a lot of Dismember. It kind of has a lot of those punky D beats. Really solid songwriting though. This came out on Raw Records, and I believe this was reissued through Redefining Darkness, which is another cool site you should definitely check out. Very straightforward. Again, if you love Swedish death metal, I pretty much said that all about another release. But the thing I can probably say about this is I think some of these songs end a little abruptly. That was kind of one of my issues on here, is you would get like some really cool spots towards the end, and you'd feel like they were going to keep building on like a really cool melody and such. And these two seem to work really well together, because there's a good amount of melody in here, but it does not skimp on any brutality. But these songs would just stop, and that kind of drove me nuts. But outside of that, I really can't say much else in terms of like any bad parts on here. This is just straight up Swedish death metal done by Venezuelans, and the production's right. It sounds raw, it sounds gritty, and I mean, if you love that style of death metal, definitely check this out. It's good stuff. Perilaxe Occlusion, Exponential Decay. This is the first demo from this Canadian 2-man death metal act, and my god, I had to remind myself that this was a demo because this is very well produced. This comes out on Chaos Records, and very much along the lines of just cavernous, brutal, old school death metal. This reminds me a lot of probably the first time I heard Tomb Mold, or the first time I jammed Malignant Altars demo. Like, it has that quality. The riffs are so damn heavy, and these guys are really, really good songwriters. Now, there are some parts there I thought that were kind of interesting, just in terms of, is this a little bit of a tribute? The song Skeletal Bifurcation, towards the end, there is a melody that has to be a nod to Black Sabbath's Under the Sun. It's the same big doomy intro riff, and there's no way in hell you don't know that riff, at least if you're a metalhead. But I don't think they just flat out took this riff. I think this is more of a nod to one of the best riffs in Black Sabbath's giant riff arsenal. These songs are flat out amazing. There's only 3 tracks on here, and all of them are absolutely killer. And I can't labor enough the fact that I forgot this was a demo. This is very well mixed, very well produced. All the instruments are separated very well. There's really cool parts of just atmosphere and such. And the vocals are a little bit back in the mix, but they appropriately fill out another level of sound on here that it just works. Everything on this EP flat out works. I love this. I have not stopped jamming it since I got it. This is absolutely fantastic. I look forward to hearing more from this band. And if you love death metal, just nasty, groovy death metal that is well written, loaded with dynamics, oh my god, check this shit out. It's awesome. Seep, Souvenirs of a Necrosadist EP. This is the Total Death reissue from this year of their 2020 EP. This is technically a one-man band from Maine, though there are two men on this one. The bassist Meatsack, which I forget the name of the other guy that's the main songwriter, but a name like Meatsack really stands out. This is just gross death doom. And I mean gross. Like, the song titles really scream more gore grind than anything else, and that's kind of what I thought I was gonna get until I actually looked at the bio. Phlegm Burial, Boiled in Piss, and Noose of Entrails. Those are all three song titles on here, and again, those are some pretty kind of gore grindy titles. But when you get down to the music, it is sludgy, murky death doom. Not working much on melody here, we're just going for sludgy, nasty riffs. And you're not going to be able to get around the riffs because the guitar tone is so damn heavy on here. It is just massive sounding. Now, one knock on here I can make is I can tell that this is a drum machine on here, and it really kind of drove me nuts because, first off, it's a very obvious drum machine. Like, you can tell it's kind of a bare bones program, and it takes away from how organic the rest of the album sounds. It sounds like there should be like a real drummer on there. And the snare that he picked for that sound, it's very plunky. It's not quite like the slam snare, but it doesn't fit. And especially when it gets more up-tempo, because there are sections where it gets, you know, more blasty or at least kind of like D-beaty. That snare kind of just grates on me after a while. But the riffs are absolutely solid. It came with a kick-ass sticker too, which is already up in my kitchen, and I dug this. This is pretty damn cool. I definitely want to check out more by him. I would love to see him get a real drummer, or at least get a better drum machine sound, but that's the only thing I can really knock on this. This is pretty damn cool. And Phlegm Burial, that's fucking gross. I love it. Definitely check this out. This is pretty nasty stuff. Vanhelgd, Diamos, Sanctuarium. This is the fifth album from the Swedish death metal act that features members of King of Asgard. This is my first experience with them too. I'd never actually heard of this band, and I saw this album cover, which looks pretty damn awesome, and I decided to jam them, and I really liked what I heard. Now, there are a lot of Swedish titles on here, and I'm not even gonna try to pronounce. There's like 40 umlauts on these things, Jesus. But yeah, this doesn't waste any time getting into the business. This is very evil, dark, sinister sounding Swedish death metal with a lot of like melodic death doom, I guess you could say, on here. The vocals are very clear, and they have sort of like a mid-range kind of raspy kind of growl to them. They do sound very sinister and appropriately evil, and that's pretty much what I got on this. A lot of sections on here kind of remind me of Bloodbath meets Paradise Lost, which kind of makes sense with Nick Holmes in the band. And, you know, maybe in terms of the vocal delivery, it is kind of similar. But you also get a lot of, like, gothic sort of atmosphere, church bells on here, and even some sections on here that would say were kind of more black metal, too. Now, I have to say, one song that stood out to me just because it was very, very repetitive in the lyrics, and generally I don't care about lyrics, but I can actually understand them on here, was the song Profaned is the Blood of the Covenant, which is a great song title. That actually sounds pretty evil, but tons of repetition. It seems like each line of the song is repeated like 4 times, and that kind of wore on me a little bit. But overall, the variety on here I thought was really cool, and the really distinct evil feel on here I thought was really cool. It kind of gave it its own thing to kind of stand out in the Swedish death metal pack, because this is Swedish as hell. It has very much that HM2 tone, but all the other stuff that they incorporate in there gives it a different feel overall, and I like the almost folky melodies that kind of come up in here too. Definitely recommend this if you're, again, a big fan of Swedish death metal, but you also kind of like Blackened, doomy, or gothic atmosphere. It really mixes that in well, and that is the thing that really kind of stands out in here and kind of makes it jump out a bit. I definitely want to check out more by this band because this is a solid offering, so definitely check this one out. Voidwomb, Altars of Cosmic Devotion EP. This is the debut EP from this Portuguese Blackened death metal act. This came out on Iron Bonehead Recordings, and this is really good. I pretty much just picked this one up on a whim, and I loved its straightforward approach. It is straight up Blackened death metal. It mixes the two very well in a fusion. And this is kind of interesting in the sense that the production is a little bit different. Generally, when I think of Blackened, well, anything, honestly, I think of lots of reverb, you fill out the sound, it's very echoey. But this is a little bit more compressed, and actually it kind of works to its benefit because, the mix is really good, everything's well balanced, and you can just hear how powerful the riffs are without it sort of droning on and echoing. Even the vocals don't have that much reverb on them, and this kind of gives it a really cool feel. Now, in terms of extra atmosphere in here, they don't employ a lot of keys or samples or a lot of ambient noise. They let the music do it, which again is a really cool thing that I liked about this. They bounce back and forth between really cool black metal moments and really cool death metal moments really well. I love the riffs on here. When they dial up the black metal, my God, those tremolos are just sinister and evil, and they can get flat out just chunky and heavy on here. I really dig this. This is an awesome debut EP. I strongly recommend checking out this band, and I look forward to future releases from them for sure. So definitely check this out. Vrenth, Baptism Death. This is the 2020 debut from this California death metal band that actually features a lot of members from a lot of other bands. You have current and former members of Ruin, Gravehill, Void Ceremony, and Ascended Dead on here, and a bunch of other ones. I could have gone on because I believe the drummer in here is in 10 different bands. So to save time, I'm just going to list those because those are pretty good ones. This is just some solid, nasty death metal with elements of, I would say, technical play in here. The vocalist is from Ruin, and I can definitely recognize his style, though I think this one, his cadences are a little bit different. Sometimes they're a little bit faster than what I'm used to from Ruin, because Ruin's definitely kind of in that autopsy sort of stomp kind of mode most of the time. This really kind of breaks into a lot of different styles on here, and surprisingly, this is pretty melodic. I was actually kind of shocked at the levels of melody that are on here because, all those other bands were known for just fierce brutality or just chaotic atmosphere. This has a lot of killer hooks on here, but it does not sacrifice one morsel of brutality. It's all here. I would say very close to Incantation. It has all the very technical fast riffing that they do in there. Also a lot of the slower Death Doom breaks in here, which absolutely just whoop ass. I pretty much knew I was going to like this, judging by all the bands that were involved in this, and yeah, I was not wrong at all. Now this actually did come out on Rotted Life, and this is one hell of a release. Kind of flew under my radar last year. I probably should have snagged it. So yeah, I strongly recommend checking this out. This is a flat out banger from a bunch of veterans. These guys definitely seem to know what they're doing because they're in so many damn good bands. So yeah, definitely check this out. It's awesome. Altered Dead, Returned to Life. This is the second album from this Canadian death metal act. This is a two-man band, and this is sludgy as hell. As soon as I heard the guitar tone, I was thinking crowbar levels of sludge. It doesn't sound like a very traditional death metal tone, but I don't know, it definitely seems to work because it's so goddamn heavy. There is a fierce sort of crust punk D-beat feel throughout all this. Whether it's breaking into a Death Doom section or blast beat sections, know full well that the D-beat stomp is coming and it will come without warning. So pretty much just imagine being at the show, standing on the edge of the pit during a Death Doom section, slow, not a lot of people are moving around, it's a lot of slow headbanging, and then the D-beat just kicks in out of nowhere, and then you're just getting run the fuck over by everybody. That's this album. Reminds me a lot of Swamp Beast, which I really wish those guys would put out a CD version of that album because I really want it. But it kind of has that sort of energy and doesn't really bother much with melody or harmonies at all. It kind of just sticks with a heavy double-tracked guitar that, again, doesn't bother with harmonies. It's more about being heavy and sort of bringing that crust punk energy through this entire album. Now, while melody kind of helped it spice it up a little bit, the intensity of the album kind of makes up for the lack of variety, and they do throw in a really cool Into the Crypt of Rays cover at the end, which I absolutely love that song. Celtic Frost rules. So yeah, I dig it. I definitely want to check out their first album to see what that was like in comparison to this one, but this is pretty solid. I strongly recommend checking this out, and I mean, if you love crusty D-beat driven death metal, this could be your new favorite band. Who knows? Check it out. Contaminated Final Man. This is the debut album from this Australian death metal act that originally started as a one-man project, but now is a full-on band. This is murky and intense. This is pretty much like the Australian version of Ascended Dead. In fact, that's a very big comparison, I think, in terms of the style. It's kind of that incantation level of murk, but with just insane blast beats, frantic drums, and then, you know, it'll shift into groovy spots and death doom breaks out of nowhere. This is intense at all times. It doesn't matter what sort of style they're playing, and, well, it's all going to be death metal, but in terms of, like, death doom or, you know, like, D-beats and shit, it doesn't matter. It's all intense all the time. It's nuts. But I gotta say, there's tons of hooks on here, and I really was kind of shocked because this is, again, murky as hell. The guitar tone is muddy but somehow pleasant. The vocals are pretty much just caveman roars with tons of reverb, but you get some big gnarly breakdowns on there and some surprisingly pleasant melodies. You just have to sift through a lot of frantic, insane death metal to find them, and I'm more than willing to do that because I love that kind of shit. So naturally, I loved this. I thought this was really, really good, and I definitely want to check out more by this band if you want some absolutely nuts death metal. And this is just, you know, it's crazy, especially the song Boneless Mass, which, man, that's a really good title. Definitely check this out. It's just intense. It is a super intense listen. I love that there are no breaks on this album, and screw it, doesn't need any breaks. Just keep rolling. This is awesome. Definitely check it out. Devotion, The Harrowing. This is the second album from this Spanish death metal act. This came out on Memento Mori Records, and this is some dreary old school death metal, and I definitely emphasize dreary. This kind of has sort of a doomy, gothic, forlorn feel on here, but it is still fiercely old school death metal. It reminds me a lot of Morbid Angel, except more like meat and potatoes. It's not like all the flurries of technical playing. There's not a lot of blast beats on here. In fact, this stays really mid-tempo to slow for the most part, but it has all those Morbid Angel dreary riffs on here. Now, I gotta say, they do a really good job with atmosphere. They employ some cleaner tones in the guitars. There's even some keys, and I could have sworn I heard timpani drums on Virtue Besmirched, which, way to use the word besmirched. You don't really hear that one very often. Pretty cool. But it kind of adds to this really cool gothic atmosphere that's on here. And Demon Sleep, the song before it, is practically a death doom song. Like, this one stays slow and dreary and somber the entire time. The one knock I have on here is there are a lot of interludes. There are, God, I want to say five interlude tracks that really don't work into the next track. That's more or less just a weird instrumental break or a soundscape. And after a while, I kind of got tired of, you know, getting interludes. I mean, you have an intro and an outro track that are both kind of just soundscapes, but again, all the stuff in between, like, you'll get two tracks back to back, like, yeah, those are really good, and I was like, all right, now I gotta sit through 46 seconds of what is this? But when they are firing on all cylinders and writing some killer death metal, it is a really good listen. So definitely check this out. Just, you know, maybe skip the interludes, or unless you're a fan of interludes, check them out. I don't know. I wasn't a fan of those, but I still recommend checking out this album. And finally, we have Foul of Serpents. This is the Seattle-based Death Doom Act's debut album. They have one other EP that I'm also looking for called Of Worms, so way to move up to Serpents. I probably should have wrote down the tracks because I can't read this ridiculous font on the back. It's ridiculous. But I know I like this. This is really sludgy, slow death doom, and my God, is it murky as hell. The vocals on here, though, man. All right, they go for a very distorted, staticky, sort of reverb-drenched growl, and it's cool at first. You know, it's kind of like, ooh, that's a really cool, like, creepy layer on here. After a while, it starts getting annoying. It kind of sounds like, you know, all those ghost hunting shows, and they get an EVP, the electronic voice phenomenon, and like, ooh, play that back, and it sounds like it's saying something, something Satan or whatever. It sounds like a recording of that, except they played it inside of a large bucket. And yeah, it kind of grates on me after a while. Though, I mean, it does add somewhat to the atmosphere, but the music's already doing enough of that. And this is slow, lumbering, nasty murk. It sounds like there was like some liquid pouring out of my speakers as this was playing. That's how gross this sounds. Even the last track, whatever the hell that says, it's a two-parter, and it actually has a really cool Funeral Doom break with really cool, like, sort of ambient, clean guitars in here. Solid stuff. I definitely want to check out their EP as well. I think I saw it on another distro that it was eyeballing. I gotta calm down on that. Maybe. Whatever. But I definitely want to check out more by this band for sure, because this was pretty solid. So yeah, definitely check this one out. Well, that knocks out another one of these, and I may or may not have spent some money on Dark Descent's distro not too long ago, so maybe there's already more coming, and by maybe there is. I definitely did. I have no restraint, and I saw some stuff I had to get. There's some stuff that I just don't want anyone else to get before me. Maybe it's selfish, maybe it's just impulsive, but I know I wanted it, that's for damn sure. So if you enjoyed this video, give it a thumbs up. And if you are new to the channel, subscribe, because we do stuff like this all the time. Also, we have a Patreon going on, so if you'd like to help us out there, please check out the link below in the description. We're gonna throw in some cool outtakes and podcasts and a bunch of different stuff on there. We want to make sure that our Patreon actually has a fair amount of cool content on there, so it's actually worth you donating to us. And of course, outside of that, we have plenty more coming. We're getting close to getting down to this Napalm Death ranking, which I'm very excited to do, and plenty more reviews, of course, and whatever other stuff we decide we want to do in terms of talking about metal, because this is still a lot of fun. So with that, I thank all of you for watching, and we will catch you later.